As part of the founding members of the 2003 UNESCO Convention for Safeguarding ICH, what was the driving reasons behind it?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, I'm not one of the founding members. I'm one of the collectives, because there were hundreds of us from around the world who came together. And I must say that Korea and Japan played a seminal role, and China, seminal role. The East Asian countries were really behind it. In fact, Mr. Matsuda was at that time the Director General of UNESCO, and he actually provided strong leadership for the drafting of the convention and its adoption in 2003. But there's a precedence to it. There's a history to it. The 1989 recommendation on folklore, followed by a very important meeting at the Smithsonian around 2000, if I remember correctly, which is published, to ask, is the approach to folk life enough in dealing with living heritage? And fantastic papers, fantastic discussion. It was driven at that stage by the Smithsonian through Dr. Richard Curran, and was the director of the Folk Life Center at the Smithsonian. But immediately after that was a very important symposium that our fishbowl think tank, as it was called then, not many people remember. The French National Commission for UNESCO brought 17 of us together in Paris. That was now, 22 years ago, and put us in a fishbowl. That means 17 of us were sitting around a table, and we were discussing, very open discussion. And there were about 260 people watching us. That's why it's called a fishbowl think tank. Now, that was very important because it was where I was the youngest, believe it or not. I was the youngest. And I recalled the NARA recommendation of the World Heritage Convention in 1994, where we, for the first time, again, I was the youngest in the NARA meeting in 1994, where we argued for recognizing the intangible heritage associated with the built environment. Like the Shinto shrines, which are based on, knowledge, techniques, replacement of materials from the Edo period, and continue to do so. But this, at that stage, this was seen as not correct by the World Heritage Committee, because they were focusing on authenticity and integrity of the fabric. So any change to the fabric, they didn't accept it. But then they realized if those changes take place based on the intangible heritage of the Shinto shrines, then it's a valid intervention, valid conservation intervention. So from 1994 to the fishbowl think tank, it gave me a certain amount of confidence to stand up to very hegemonic Western discourse, because these meetings were very tough, because cultural heritage of all kinds was still seen from a very Eurocentric perspective. Because if you look at, the 1997 World Review, or 1995 to 97 review of World Heritage sites, the majority of them in the world were in Europe, right? And the whole of Africa had, I think, about 3 or 4 sites. That's about it. And it was so driven by a discourse that might be quite valid, and I fully respect that. Might be valid for Europe, and I think we should respect each other's heritage. So in the fishbowl think tank, we raised a lot of questions. I'll give you an example. Very elderly, very famous scholar referred to the Garifuna from the Caribbean and referred to them, and he said he referred to them as being primitive. And I got quite upset about this, and I said, sorry, you're an eminent professor, you should respect others. What if the Garifuna thinks that you're primitive, or people who come and think they are primitive? It's all ethnocentric perception. And Garifuna, for example, the landing in Belize on the 9th of November, every year is celebrated It's very important part of the intangible heritage of the Carib. So we had some discussions, but I was very fortunate because there was a fantastic Indian scholar, Dr. Kapila Vatsayam, very famous. She's no more. She passed away about 2 years ago. She was on the executive board of UNESCO. So she came up to me because she was watching what was happening. And she said, Amareshwar, don't hesitate to say what you have to say because your generation needs to raise the questions. Your generation needs to challenge the colonial discourse and the Eurocentric discourse. And that gave me a lot of confidence because, well, she was one of the most famous scholars of India, on culture and heritage, and her giving the encouragement. So from there onwards, we went through, there were changes in the administration in UNESCO as to who was dealing with the possible future convention. And in fact, originally, we didn't think of two conventions. It was going to be not 2003 and 2005, because where do you draw the line between that which is living heritage and that which is creativity? Because creativity is grounded in living heritage, right? And so it was meant to be one convention dealing with it. I mean, there's an old English saying, well, once a practice, twice a tradition. And so the idea of having a joint convention dealing with both living heritage and creativity was mooted. But then soon it became, in some ways, with the impact of World Trade Organization, people become members of impact of globalization, it became a major issue. So the Intangible Heritage Convention was drafted and adopted in 2003. And the 2005 Convention on Cultural Contents and Expressions came into operation in 2005. But the 2005 one focused very much on the marketplace, products, creativity, things that could be measured. And in numbers, how many CDs, how many theater tickets, and so on, because you can't do that with intangible heritage. It's living heritage. And and then we had some wonderful people. I mean, one of them was, I think, your previous jury member, Professor Noriko Aikawa. She became the director of the Secretariat for Intangible Heritage Convention. She played a very important role in making sure things progress. But in all of this, there was some scoping. Before the convention, there was a whole process for declaring by UNESCO masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage traditions of humanity, right? I mean, there were, I think, 3 declarations, but I can never forget the famous speech given by the Director General of UNESCO, Mr. Matsura, on the 18th of May, 2001 in Mali, in Bamako, Mali, in declaring the first set of masterpieces. He emphasized that the recognition of cultural heritage is still very much from the global north, from Europe. There's a lot of imbalance. We need to find means and mechanisms to find a balance. I mean, he was extremely respectful as the DG of UNESCO, and he was a wonderful elder to have, respectful of all people's heritage. But then he pointed out there was an imbalance. And I think that the Intangible Heritage Convention is the seminal turning point in the history of UNESCO, in the history of cultural heritage discourse, to find that balance, between a world which largely was driven, from Europe, mostly former colonial powers, if you will, and something that was followed by their former colonies, even after decolonization. We're still a long way, whether it's intangible heritage or world heritage, or even the creativity. We're still a long way from dealing with decolonization. It's only recently people started talking about decolonization, and we're still a very long way from dealing with that. So I think those are some reflections, if you will. And what I love about the Intangible Heritage Convention is, in my own generation, I've seen so many things disappear, you know, and with globalization, you know, in my youth, it was a transistor radio. And then came the television, black and white, then color television. Now the tsunami of digital affordances. And so the world is coming together in one go, yes, but on the other hand, once again, with the World Commission for Culture and Development, where I was an expert advisor in the late 90s, when we actually did an analysis of the fastest growth of digital technologies, it was in the global south, but where was most of the content controlled from? From about 7 to 8 countries in the global north. So the whole question of content control, you know, who creates the content, you know, is really important. And I think that even with intangible heritage, my question relates to, as one of the accredited, UNESCO accredited trainers and mentors for the convention, that when we talk about training, we need to be very careful. Is the training decolonized? What we are dealing with is respectful of the cultural and linguistic diversity of humanity. And in fact, last year, I ran a capacity building program through EachCap for 23 professors in various departments. It was also supported by CREHAP from Beijing. And I emphasized to them that there's still the tendency in Asia Pacific to ape the West. You know, if something is done in UK, Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard in the US, then we think it's right. If something is done, this is a kind of you know, colonial legacies that we need to shed through interrogation and find the best of what knowledge the world has to offer, but we have to respect the best of what our own local knowledge systems, indigenous knowledge systems offer. So finding that balance again is really important.